Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlicker, shills, desolators, peasants, vassals, minions, jihadists. I'm a useful idiot. Welcome. And today I want to talk about ISIS, or the Islamic State. And I guess we can just keep calling him ISIS, because it's kind of like Prince. Prince can change his name as many times as he wants, but everybody's still going to call him Prince. And the Islamic State can change their name to whatever they want, and they'll probably still be ISIS. But anyway, the Islamic State now stretches across Iraq and Syria in this new caliphate. And there's been a lot of figures thrown around about how many they are. So I wanted to just kind of take a closer look at what information is available, which is very little, and try and figure this out. Because initially the United States seemed to indicate that there was up to 5 to 10,000 ISIS Islamic State fighters in Iraq. And we now have the Islamic State claiming they have 30,000 just in Iraq. And you would think that the United States would exaggerate, particularly for political purposes, and now, of course, this warmongering purpose for fear, to inflate the numbers. So the fact that the United States said a few months ago that there was 10,000 Islamic State fighters in Iraq seems rather perplexing. Although, once again, that was several months ago when they weren't necessarily discussing imminent intervention, and now they are. So I'm sure they would be more than happy to revise the numbers now. Where it gets interesting is Wikipedia now claims that there's somewhere between 80 and 100,000 Islamic State fighters. And so this is a number that's getting thrown around now. And it showed up again last August in an article claiming that a Syrian watch group that's based out of London, but has had some reliable figures, is suggesting that 50,000 Islamic State fighters are in Syria, and that includes 20,000 non-Syrian foreign fighters. And so you put that 50,000 together with the 30,000 that are in Iraq, and you come up with 80,000. So 80 to 100,000 doesn't seem like too much of a stretch based on these numbers that are thrown around in these articles. The Islamic State themselves back the figure of 50,000 fighters in Syria, as well as stating they have another 30,000 in Iraq. But once again, for propaganda purposes, it's certainly in ISIS or the Islamic State's interest to overstate how many fighters they have. So the truth probably lies somewhere in between. We also have the Iraqi government figures who suggest that ISIS or the Islamic State have a total of 100,000 fighters. But once again, it's in their best interest to inflate the figures because they are fighting against ISIS or the Islamic State and are actually losing. So they want to exaggerate the strength of the Islamic State forces. Then we have Israel. I found an article where Israel put the number of so-called Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Syria at 50,000, but that includes the al-Nusra Front, which is somewhere between 10 and 20,000 operating in Syria. So those numbers take the general vicinity of numbers down a little bit. So if they're suggesting, say, that there's 40,000 Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Syria, then they're obviously looking at a much lower number. But we're also not sure how much they are discerning between Al-Qaeda and ISIS, or the Islamic State. But this monitoring group said that just in the month of August, 6,000 new recruits were brought in, including 1,000 foreigners. And they even label 200 defectors from the al-Nusra Front. And once again, these numbers of 60, 70, 80, 100,000 seem feasible in the extent that we've had ISIS operating in Iraq in this offensive for the better part of 9 months now, at least. And they certainly have a history of going back before that in Syria. So the idea that they could be amassing more and more fighters. Let's remember there's been these huge prison breaks. They've been on a huge recruiting binge on a global scale, and we have jihadis coming from places like Yemen and Libya. So that could also add to the numbers. And then the fact that they become such a boutique brand, a boutique global brand, and are so hip now. I'm sure there's plenty of people in Hollywood walking around with ISIS and Islamic State swag and T-shirts on now because this has become so hip. And so the recruitment between the pressing into service of people from conquered territories and then volunteers that they pick up along the way. We've heard these stories of villages where they capture it with 100 soldiers, and they end up with another 100 or another 1,000 recruits. So this buildup of numbers could be quick, and we could be looking at the kind of numbers that they're talking about, 80, 90, 100,000. And then if you also look at just the nature of the battlefield, once again, we would have to find some substantial numbers of Islamic State fighters because they're laying siege to Aleppo. They took the air base of Raqqa with a large force. They took a base a couple months ago in Homs in Syria, which I did a video about, where 400 to 500 Syrians were slaughtered. So once again, that takes a fairly substantial force, 2, 3, 4, 5,000 involved in some of these assaults, and then they're taking on the Syrian government head-on, the Syrian government forces head-on. That takes a substantial number, and then they're taking on the Kurds and the Iraqi government forces and Shia militias, and in Iraq, which also takes substantial forces, and they're also expanded across a huge swath of territory which they are maintaining control of. That's one of the things that separates them from some of these other militant groups, these jihadi groups. They are holding this ground that they take, and therefore they need fighters in order to hold the ground they take. So taking all these things into consideration, holding vast swaths of territory that they've conquered and having the capacity to do so, having the capacity to launch these multiple fronts, these multiple assaults and offensives all over Syria and all over Iraq. The fact that they have an incredible publicity machine that's generating thousands of new recruits, probably far more quickly than we can even imagine. And then we have jihadis from all over the region flooding in and wanting to join in on the Islamic State success. So all these factors countered in seems to make it likely that indeed ISIS is a formidable battlefield force that could have anywhere between 50 and 100,000 fighters. Either number is pretty substantial, and in that region could have a huge effect. And needless to say, the forces that are lining up now in this new supposed U.S. coalition to combat ISIS is going to have its work cut out for it. And even as the coalition inflicts these casualties on the Islamic State, it seems like inevitably there will continue to be more and more recruits flocking to this region, particularly if the U.S. gets entangled there more and becomes a local target again. So there we have it. I just wanted to clear that up, or at least have a dialogue about it, and look at what kind of numbers we're actually talking about as far as the Islamic State, and the numbers seem to be formidable. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.